Light vehicles were honking and people were hurrying to the streets of New York, never interrupting the city's beat. However, in the middle of all the activity, a man sat hunched in the corner of a sidewalk as though he had left this world. His tattered boots, dust-covered hands, and worn military jacket suggested a time when he had been disciplined and honorable, but now he was only a shadow of his former self. His name was David Carter, and he had served his country in Afghanistan for years, fighting valiantly and devotedly. When he returned, however, nothing was the same. The ghosts of war haunted him, turning his nights. As he sat by a rusty barrel fire trying to survive another chilly night, David noticed a group of young men approaching. They were laughing, carrying fast food bags, and shoving each other playfully. One of them nudged his friend and pointed in David's direction. He was sleep-deprived. His days were hopeless. He couldn't hold down a job. He had lost his family, and he had become more and more alone. He used to be a soldier, but now he's nothing. Look at him. The other one laughed. I'm willing to wager that he still believes he is in the Army. Let's see if he is still capable of fighting. On that same night, John McCain was walking through the city after attending a charity event. To him, veterans were more than just former soldiers. They were the backbone of a country, but he had witnessed firsthand how many of them were left to struggle alone. As he was walking down the sidewalk, he noticed a disturbance up ahead. A group of young men had surrounded a homeless man, taunting him. David slowly raised his head. His eyes were tired, but something inside him stirred. The young men kept approaching, and as one of them took another step forward, a firm voice rang out through the chilly night air. McCain accelerated his pace as he experienced a familiar feeling of unease. Something wasn't right. When one of the young men grabbed David's shoulder and said, "Hey, soldier boy, what's wrong? You scared another one." Another young man grabbed an empty bottle from a trash can and smashed it onto the pavement. Perhaps we should award him a medal. David flinched, but then he turned around and froze in front of him. His stern face conveyed the weight of years of authority and a steadfast sense of justice. He was John McCain. "I believe it's time for you guys to move on." McCain's forceful yet calm tone caused the group to pause, but they knew who he was. They exchanged hushed words for a short while before laughing nervously, shrugged, and turned to leave. McCain stooped to look at David as he turned to face him. His cheeks were sunken and his face was unshaven. Yet there was still a glimmer of something in his eyes that had not yet gone out. "What's your name?" McCain inquired in a kind but firm tone. David paused, his voice raspy from inactivity. David Carter. McCain's eyes furrowed a little because the name seemed familiar. "You served in Afghanistan, didn't you, David Carter?" David nodded slowly, and McCain let out a long sigh. McCain led David into a small cafe. The man hesitated at the door. The sound of laughter, the smell of fresh coffee, everything inside felt far away and inaccessible. He pushed his hands into his pockets, head lowered, and McCain gently squeezed his shoulder, saying, "Come on in, it's warm." This man had once been a warrior who defended his country, but now there was no one left to protect him. A waiter gave McCain a warm greeting as they sat down, but David felt as though everyone was staring at his beat-up jacket, scruffy beard, and hollow face. Despite the familiarity, Drew's looks of interest and sympathy were painful. McCain took a menu. "What do you want to eat?" David said, "I'm not hungry," shaking his head. A steaming bowl of soup and a cup of coffee were set in front of David after McCain urged that he needed something warm. David ignored the soup, instead clutching the coffee cup and enjoying its warmth against his chilly hands. After a lengthy pause, McCain just waited patiently and silently. When I returned, I found no one waiting, no job, no family, just endless nightmares. McCain nodded, saying that returning home doesn't mean the fight is done. It simply shifts the battlefields. David eventually spoke in a hoarse voice. David chuckled inanely. "My wife, Linda, used to say that I was strong, but after I returned, the nightmares made her weaker. One night, I screamed so loudly that she left the next morning without saying a word, and his voice cracked. I lost my job after my boss said that I needed help, but who could afford it? I had no insurance, no family. I contacted my mother, but she was unable to assist. She said perhaps once you were upright again, and then she hung up. His hands trembled as he grasped. The tighter coffee cupped the man who had once served his country was now lost and forgotten. The roughness in David's hand spoke of a soldier's past, but now they were empty and trembling from years of neglect. McCain leaned in and said, "I can't let you stay here. I'm going to help you." David looked up in disbelief and uncertainty, and he asked, "Why don't you even know me?" McCain gave me a comforting grin, saying that sometimes all you need to do is look a man in the eyes to understand his value. David's tears were not concealed. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't merely homeless. He was still a soldier in need of assistance to get back on his feet, and McCain was prepared to provide it. The first few days were the most difficult. Long after the war was over, McCain continued to visit David, sitting by his side and sharing stories of both victory and loss of the battles fought. He talked about the soldiers he had seen fall, the friends he had lost, and the wounds that never fully healed for the first time in years. David struggled with his anger, resentment, and the ghosts of his past. He felt like a prisoner in his own mind, trapped between guilt and despair. David gradually felt understood, started therapy, faced his demons, and found a way to deal with his trauma. He fought through withdrawal, regained control over his thoughts, and eventually found employment. Gradually, he felt like he was once again a member of society. But the best with McCain's help, David accomplished something he had previously believed was impossible. He was able to stand on his own 2 feet. Years later, he was no longer a man lost in the streets. Instead, he was someone who could now offer a hand to those who had once been like him. Through McCain's Veteran Support Program, David found purpose. He was no longer just surviving anymore. He was helping others do the same. One evening while working at a shelter for homeless veterans, a man walked in his military jacket, his shoulders sagging and his face lined with exhaustion. David gazed at him for a while, his eyes heavy with defeat, and he recognized the expression. It was the same one he had worn once in a previous life. He then approached the man and sat next to him, grinning warmly. He said, "Hey, brother, my name is David. I used to be just like you, but you're not alone across the room anymore." John McCain didn't need to speak as he saw the event play out, because he understood that true heroes sometimes simply need someone to revive them on the battlefield.